thank you very much to both of our speakers for the presentations. I'd like to ask a question that maybe combines some of the things that you've both spoken about. Well, I've heard your call for supporting the local entrepreneurs in South Sudan because they're taking risks and they're committed to building their country. When I was there recently, a few weeks ago, I also met with some of them and also was very personally motivated by the energy and enthusiasm that they have to rebuild their country. And I was wondering, Dr. Kadir, from your perspective, how does the livelihood framework relate to support for local entrepreneurs and for small-scale, bottom-up rural business development? Are those, how compatible or incompatible are those kind of two ideas? And could you comment on that?
Would you like to take up other questions? Okay, let's get more few questions. Let's get more questions, then we'll answer them.
Just a quick one to Fahim. Is there any tension between the aim of sustainability and keeping the principle or core principle of being dynamic? I mean, the question is, should one aim for jobs that people can have for the rest of their lives? Is that what sustainability means? And if not, what does sustainability mean?
Should we answer these two questions? Okay. Thank you both, Kevin and Peter. I think, Kevin, one of the key features of sustainable livelihoods is to look at the possibilities, what possibilities exist at the local level and how those possibilities can be materialized. The small enterprises or micro enterprises can come into the picture of livelihoods once you know that people do have existing capacities that can be built on, that can be promoted through different activities. And I don't see any reason why can't micro and small enterprises be promoted to create new livelihoods and also to sustain different kinds of livelihoods. I think that's the starting point for many of the discussions that we're having around the notions of economic development. I'm not too sure whether that's going to help them address other concerns, social, political, and non-economic concerns. But it is the starting point for us to address some of the broader issues with regards to sustainable human development. That's the starting point. As for the question of the conflict between being dynamic and promoting sustainability, I don't see that the conflict, the notion of dynamism is introduced to the concept of sustainable livelihoods for two very specific reasons. One of which is to go beyond the traditional, very conventional understanding of development, where everything is understood as a kind of static thing, and you make a linear progression from a particular end to the next. I think the reason here is simple. We want that chain needs to be broken down completely. So you can make a living that is dynamic, that reflects on the needs and the priorities of the communities. That's one thing. The sustainability, I think, I don't necessarily agree all the time with the Barton Commission. But if we are understanding sustainability not from the perspective of sustaining an effort, but also from the perspective of promoting justice and equality, then I don't think there would be any conflict between sustainability and being dynamic.
I had two parts, two different. One concerns the legal framework. When you talk about entrepreneurs, I was curious to know whether there's a component of a need for a legal framework in South Sudan that would go along with setting up, as an entrepreneur, setting up a business, having the security that if you're going to invest, investors need to know that there's there a legal framework in place? And my second question concerns the notion of sacrifice. I think that's a very tricky concept, you know, in a place, I don't know, I know in Eastern Europe, you know, there was an expectation that once democratization set in, that there was going to be fast wealth. You know, and this concept of it might take a very long time doesn't sit well with the community that's lived so long with sacrifice, with needing to sacrifice. So I was hoping you could address that.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to address the legal framework question. We have to recognize that South Sudan is still a nation in transition, and those in the business world know the idea of risk and returns, and so it becomes a question of are we willing to risk our investments in these areas, because we cannot guarantee that your investments will be safeguarded. But there is evidence that the legal framework works, and the proof is in international organizations from various countries such as China, Malaysia, and India are currently investing in the oil industry, and so far there haven't been any issues with regard to the investment, except of course the dispute, the overall dispute between the two countries that still exist. So the South Sudan government has basic legal laws that work, and international organizations have already entered our country based on these laws, and that's why we're encouraging other partners, especially in the western part of the world, who are a bit hesitant, and for all good reasons, because human rights issue must always precede all the other types of interests. And we do appreciate when several countries talk about the human rights situation before they kick off about business. So yes, there are no guarantees, so it becomes a question of risk and the returns that come from it. The other notion of sacrifice. You see, it's very hard to ask people who are not South Sudanese to sacrifice for our cause, because it should be a self-conviction. You know, what are your interests and what are you willing to offer to the cause of others? Because we do recognize that our livelihoods here are better. We do recognize that we also have our own people to look after, and we believe that first and foremost, those who should sacrifice are our own nationals, but we believe that humanity is in all of this together, and it just becomes a question of whether you are willing to walk this path with us to risk your wealth or your persons.
Just quickly make one comment. I think I share your concern, and looking at the Egyptian context and the political context, I think people are being tired of listening to the rhetoric, the political rhetoric that you have to wait another year or two before you can see the signs of progress. And I'm familiar with some other countries in Eastern Europe, and I'm doing some research in the Western Balkans, and I see similar stories of people being very frustrated with the rhetoric of being patient and wait for another year or two. And there are two things that I want to say is that unless you put a redistributive mechanism in place and make sure that whatever the benefits of the transition that can be distributed equally among different actors, people are not going to be very happy with the outcome, number one. And the second thing, in any transitional societies, there will be some transitional cost, and unless the transitional costs are again distributed equally among different actors, there will be frustrations, and that may in fact spoil the whole purpose of transition.
Let me just add a little bit into the discussion. I think the issue is it's complex in a way. On the ground, there's still conflicts. There are still conflicts, basically. So if the conflicts are not resolved, yes, you can go and open a business, but the following day, the group comes and destroys your business, so you're gone. You don't have insurance, you don't have those type of environment, nobody insures you. So it is hard. Of course, the legal reforms are needed. At the moment, we have sort of the interim national constitution for Sudan and the transitional constitution for South Sudan. They're not permanent. So there's need for actual reforms and to incorporate sort of the locals for developing the constitution. Because at the moment, all the constitutions, the transitional constitution and the interim constitutions were crafted by politicians. The locals were not involved into decision making, how the constitution should actually reflect their aspirations. And of course, there are also issues with the judicial system. Yes, they can charge you, but nobody will follow up. Or because you're a politician, you can do whatever you want because you're in power. Or if because you're a military person, you can do whatever you want. So there's need for those type of reforms. And of course, reforms in terms of administrative reforms too. Like who follows all these paper trails or who follows what is done? Nobody's out there. The capacity is not there to do that. And of course, the worst enemy that we have is now corruption. Whatever you do, is always corruption will also always pull you down. There are very interesting ideas that out there in South Sudan, but corruption always pulls them down. There is the Anti-Corruption Commission, but they don't have teeth. There's no teeth in there. Basically, the government does what they want. So it is a mixed bag of problems.
Thank you. Dr. Fahim, you said, I think if I understood you well, you said that the donor agencies in sustainable livelihoods, donor agencies take a back seat.
They're supposed to. They're supposed to.
Are you saying that they're supposed to, but do they actually do take back seat? Can you give us examples of...
Well, it emerged in the context of the debates that took place in the UK. The Department of International Development in the UK played a decisive role in institutionalizing the concept of sustainable livelihoods. There was a desire on the part of the DFID to allow popular organizations and community organizations to be in the driver's seat and make all the important decisions. That's a theoretical way of looking at some of the prospects for development or democratic development. In reality, of course, that doesn't always happen. But there are some interesting examples. I think some of the works by Robert Chambers would show very clearly that yes, donors have, and I'm also aware of some of the activities undertaken by NORAD, for instance, SIDA, the Swedish International Development Agency. They didn't really interfere with the policy and the practices of local organizations. They allow local organizations to make their choices. Can I generalize it? No.
I have these two short questions because you talked before about sustainable livelihood of people in both South Sudan and Sudan and investing in people in some ways, using whatever resources that come in from somewhere or local so that people are involved and decide their future, what way they should be. But I see, of course, in recent days, even the local resources which are there, like oil, goes oil down, say both countries. But the political implications itself becomes a problem. And oil sometimes stops flowing because of somebody is not happy somewhere. So I don't know how you guys see this addition to reconcile this, to make sure that, well, you are my enemy, but you are hungry and I'm hungry, so if we can eat, why not leave that thing? Because there is I don't know how can we decide that. The other question is, of course, you talked before about diaspora community. So Sudan, of course, when I went there last time, because there is some kind of apprenticeship. So when you go from here, people look at you as something with suspicion, as if you are going to expose something. And so, for you to be welcome in is a little bit of a challenge for some people. So, I don't know, is there any way you can devise and make them trust when we go from here, we are not going to have anybody that contribute, because that's where most of us were born. Maybe those who were born somewhere elsewhere, they're not that much concerned. So, I don't know, if there is anything. Most of you can suggest in those areas that some of us can carry in mind. When you go back there, you say, well, okay, let me try this, and let's see how it works.
I mean, both you and I are in the diaspora, so it's hard to say that I'll be more experienced than you are, but I think it all boils down to how organized we are. We know that our diaspora communities are not well coordinated, and I think going as an individual, you can expect those problems to happen. And so I think we should organize ourselves so that we can have an effective voice in South Sudan. So my appeal was to the government, because I know that the government has to spearhead this or have a change in attitude in terms of how we look at the diaspora. So my role and your role is, how can we better organize ourselves in order to have a voice, not to be a force in South Sudan, because we do have rights. We are equally citizens of that nation, and we cannot just be written off. So let us organize ourselves better, and let us be well coordinated. So there must be differentiation between when you are going to visit and when you are talking about development issues. So
I think you will always be faced with the inside or outside dilemma. You wear two different hats. You live in Canada, and you have created different identity for yourself. Unless you become one of the community members and part of the community, it's not going to be easy for you to transcend the divides that are already in place. It's a tough question, and I have seen similar examples in other parts of the world, where the diaspora were not necessarily able to really do anything positive because of the us and they divide. Well, as for the first question that you asked, I think it's a complex issue. The macro-micro connections that I mentioned, I think unless we are beginning to address some of the concerns of bad governance, nothing is going to happen. The whole concept of sustainable livelihood is influenced and guided by the principles of justice, equality, and environmental sustainability. These are normative principles, and you cannot make any of these things happen unless you create a structure of good governance.
Okay, I think we're going to the last one.
Okay. So foreign aid creates independence. So how do we ensure sustainable development without creating a welfare state in the two Sudans?
I'm not really here to say that foreign aid needs to be imported and foreign aid needs to be introduced to both Sudan and South Sudan to promote development. I do not really promote that idea at all. If I have given you that impression that foreign aid plays a decisive role in promoting sustainable livelihoods and sustainable development, then I think I have communicated something very different. That's not what I'm supposed to say here, and I don't believe in those issues. Different empirical studies done over the last, I would say, about 20 years or so have clearly shown us that in many cases, foreign aid created a culture of dependence instead of solving any of the local problems. In my discussion, I haven't brought really the issue of foreign aid up at all for different reasons. I think if the experts right here would like to discuss the role of foreign aid, that needs to be understood within the context of local development, not within the context of global development.
Thank you. Thank you.